Good morning, I'm your host Thomas Balois, and this is a presentation on how teams can help boost productivity in your organization. So, firstly, a couple of things to run through. The first one, namely, is why we should be using Teams in the first place compared to other products like GoTo or Zoom. So, the advantage Teams has over these other third party products is the amount of integration it can provide with your current Office 365 setup. So, namely, these are things like SharePoint, OneDrive, your Outlook calendar, and many more of the Office 365 offerings. So, Teams compared to Zoom has a lot more functionality. On top of that, it's also got a lot more control and auditability over what happens in Teams. Chats can be moderated, policies can be put into place, and recordings can be easily archived and referred to back later. So, moving on to the difference between Teams in the web and Teams on desktop. So, there's two primary ways of accessing it. The third one would be via mobile phone. This won't be covered in this session. So, firstly, we can access Teams from our web browsers. So, if we go to this address, teams.microsoft.com, we'll be able to log in and we'll be provided with a very similar Teams interface to the desktop version. So firstly, you'll notice that a lot of things might be similar in the web version compared to the desktop version. And that will be mostly the case until you get into a meeting, whereby once you join a meeting in the web version, the functionality will become a lot more limited compared to the desktop. So what I mean by that is you won't be able to apply as many filters to your background. You might lose out on a couple of other controls in the meeting compared to the desktop version. So, but you would still be able to access your chats, manage your teams, settings, and any other third-party apps you have integrated into there as well. So the focus on the session today will be on the desktop version, but it's good to know that you can access it through the web version if need be, if you're on the go. So first of all, there are two differences between teams and channels. So in order for there to be a channel, there needs to be a team first. So the way you can look at teams is you can have a team per office or per department. For example, if HP Tech had multiple offices, we could have a team for Office 1, team for Office 2, and then within that we could have channels, which might refer to the departments within that office. So channels are essentially where you would go to share files, message people, and teams are ways of organizing those channels into groups. So if we go ahead and create or join a team down here on the left, we've got a couple of options we're presented with. So working our way from the right, the first one is join team. So if a public team has been set up, it then gives users the ability to join that team in the organization. Secondly, we've got an option for meeting code. This is if you've been provided access to a team and you might not have received your invitation, or you might be joining a team from a third-party organization. In this case, they would provide you with a Teams code. You would enter this code and join a team from here. So if we go ahead and create a new team, so from here we've got a couple of different options we can select. So the first ones being the templates that Microsoft provide for you. They are currently adding more templates into this list. But essentially what these do is they create a team and channels just like any other thing. The difference being that it sets up these channels for you automatically, and it also integrates these following apps into that team as well. So if we take the adopting Office 365 one, we can see that it will create 5 channels for us and integrate these 4 apps automatically. So next is the option of privacy. So there's 2 options, private and public. Like I said, if you set a team to public, anyone from your organization will be able to join a team and become a member of that group. The other one is private, whereby whoever sets up this team will need to manually invite people before they can join and view the chats and the files and all that type of stuff. So if we set it to private, Then we can give our team a name. You can add a friendly description as well, but a lot of the time you should be making the team's name self-explanatory anyway. So descriptions can be added, but aren't always useful to add. And secondly, you can also name the channels that get created before you go ahead and create it. The general one can't be shared or changed. So once a group is created, a team is created, it will always have this general channel, and this can't be changed. So as we can see on the left here, it's starting to provision those different channels. Cool. So we can come back to that one for the time being. This is an HR one which I set up from a template using Microsoft's provided template. So we've got a couple of different channels here. It's created for us. And then as we can see, it's also set up these tabs along the top here. So we've got a couple of default ones. So obviously the first one is going to be post. This one can't be deleted or moved or hidden. Basically, this would be the default view for any channel you click on. So next we've got files. This is just a neat way of organizing all the files and attachments that have been sent in this team throughout the different posts. So if you know you want to look for a attachment that was sent a year ago, instead of having to scroll through all the messages, you could hop into a file section and search that file this way. The next one is a wiki section. This almost acts as like a shared notes section. This is, I would recommend, mostly being used for general information that you want to have easily accessible, but I wouldn't use it as a notes taking, or I wouldn't use it as like a Word document as a means of working. If you wanted anything a bit more robust, I would recommend using something like OneNote or storing things in a Word document. This is more for static information that needs to be accessible to people, but that won't be changed a lot or won't be anything majorly important. Next along the top here is we can add more tabs as well if we wanted to. So I'll dive into a bit more depth about these later, but essentially these are third-party products and other Microsoft products you can integrate into your Teams channel, just sort of helping you cultivate everything into one location. As we can see from this training channel, we've got a milestones tab, and this is using the Microsoft milestones app that they provide. So moving on to actually managing the teams and provisioning it. If we hover over these three dots, we've got a couple of options. So if we go into the first one, manage team. So from here we can see who is a member of that team. This is important to manage if you are setting your teams to private. In this case, you can add a member from here, or click on these three dots, add member from here. It's important to note that when you add someone to the HR team, for example, they will then have access to all of these channels by default. Pending requests, this is someone has joined your team via meeting code. They haven't quite been invited yet, so they will be stuck in the pending requests. At that point, someone who is an owner of this team will need to manually approve that user. Channels are a way of the channels tab is a way of managing what can be seen and what can be done within these channels, just a way of organizing it. So what you can do is you can actually hide these from users. So the way it works is on the left here you will see 4 hidden channels. So when you start hiding these channels, this is how it will appear to users. The channels will still be there, the content will still be there. The only difference is you'll have to click on this free drop down and then you'll be able to see these. And then people can manually show those and pin those if they want to. However, this will be a personal view, so it won't affect everyone else in the team. If you did want to do it for everyone in the team, hide or show channels, you can do it from here instead. If you've also accidentally deleted the channel, you can come into here and restore it from the deleted tab as well. I believe it's currently 30 days you have to restore that content before it gets fully deleted. Moving on to settings, we've got access to the Teams picture. This is just an easy way for people to recognize your team when they're scrolling through them. Member permissions, this sort of dictates what users in that team are allowed to do. So you can stop people from uploading images, custom apps. You can stop people from being able to edit the messages and even delete their messages as well. So this provides a good way for managing auditability and accountability, so that once someone sent something, they can't go back and edit it. Next is guest permissions, and this is a bit more basic. So by default, members have permission to do everything except owner level changes, whereas guests have the least amount of privilege possible. When you add a guest to a team, the only thing they'll be able to do is send messages, see attachments, and check on the tabs along the top. They won't be able to edit any content more than that. And if you want to allow guests to update channels, delete channels, you have to explicitly dictate that in this section. So, limiting mentions. Mentions are ways of Teams to get notifications to you quicker. So when a group chat is going off in Teams, you might not always get those notifications straight away. A lot of the time, to prevent you getting too many notifications, what might happen is if a chat is quite active and lots of messages are being sent, those notifications will be aggregated and you might not get those notifications straight away, just to stop you from getting spammed. As a way of getting around that, you can use the @team tag or @channel tag. And what that will do is anyone who's a member of that team or that particular channel will get an explicit notification on their device saying that they've been mentioned. So in order to prevent people from overusing these or abusing that feature, you can turn these off for members, sort of quieten down the chats. Teams code. So as I mentioned before, you can generate a code which you can send to users, and then they can request to join your team. One thing to note is once you know that person has added that team using that code, and you've approved them from a pending request, I would recommend removing that code so that it doesn't get overly shared, and then more people join unnecessarily. But like I said, when someone joins, there will be a pending request, so you'll still have to manually approve them anyway. Fun stuff. This is just if you want to keep the chat a bit more professional, you can disable things like GIFs and memes within all the channels as well. Tags. So tags are like the @mention in this section here, but these are a bit more specific. So for example, if we have in this scenario, if we take a company has a Teams chat for the entire company, and then let's say sales team 1 are doing really well, you might want to create a tag for sales team 1, add those members within that, and then post something on the company chat to say @teams 1, well done on your sales last week, and you can manage these from here. But again, you can stop people from creating them or managing them. So for example, tags are managed by owners or tags are managed by members as well. By default, I'd recommend only owners should be able to do these, otherwise you might get users starting to add too many. But we'll go into how to create tags in a second. Analytics, these are just sort of a brief overview of how your team's being used, meeting minutes, least interactive with channels, most active users, the amount of files being shared, just sort of a brief overview of what's been done in the last 7, 30 or 90 days. So quite an important one is manage apps. So the app section in here is when a user adds an app to your channel. Now this is what was along the top of the bar, like the wiki in the file section and those third-party apps. When you remove that app from that channel, it doesn't actually remove it from the team itself. If you want to completely disconnect that from your team, you'll have to go into this section here and manually delete it. All it does when you do it from here, for example, if I remove this, all it does is it hides it from view. If you want to actually fully disconnect that app from your team, you'll need to come to here I want to completely disconnect the praise thing, we don't use that anymore, for example, I would uninstall that app. It's worth noting that depending which apps you are using, I would recommend always backing up the data or making sure you've got everything you need off it. A lot of the Microsoft apps will keep your data because it's just disconnecting it from the team. But if you're integrating third-party apps into that channel, I would recommend making sure you've got all the data you need to, because I can't confirm if that data will still be there in the background as well. So moving on to tags, like I mentioned before, we can create a tag for sales team 1. I may not create it because it's a relatively new account I've just set up. Essentially what you would do is you would add members from your organization into this tag, and it's almost like a separate mention or a separate group of people which you can mention in the chat and single out. So moving on to channels, there are a couple of channel specific settings. Anyone can post show alerts, or only members can post. This is quite a good setting if you want to have a read only or an information only chat. So you can have a chat for the entire organization, but people can only view those messages, not respond to them. Therefore, if you wanted to keep the channel a bit cleaner, a bit more restricted, this would be a good way of doing so. So next is moving on to the calendar section. So in the calendar section, this will actually sync with your Outlook calendar. So what this will do is it will pull through any meetings that have a Teams link activated on it. And then once it appears, you will just have an option to click on the team and join straight from there. Alternatively, you can also set meetings from here. So we're going to a new meeting, set a meeting title, set who the invitees should be, and also the optional attendees as well for that meeting. You can have these meetings recurring as well, and you can also link them to specific channels or specific teams. So, for example, if this relates to office decoration, I can link that to that channel, and then what it will do is in that office decoration channel, it will keep the meeting history within that itself. So if we go ahead and set up a test meeting, so before you actually join the meeting, you do get a couple of options. First one is you can change if your camera is on or off. You've also got the option to apply some backgrounds as well. And you can also adjust some of your sound settings before you actually hop into the meeting and start interacting with people. So moving left to right, so first one is this shield icon at the top left-hand side. This is just here's more formality. It's basically just saying that your Teams chat is secured and encrypted. You'll always get this coming up here because Teams will actually allow you to run unless it's secured and encrypted. This is more just to inform you that it's actually being put into place. So next we've got the timer. This is just basically how long is set on the meeting. When you do get close to your meeting end time, for example, I've scheduled a meeting from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Once we get to 10:55, you'll get a little banner come up on the side and then a little warning here to say you've got 5 minutes left in the meeting as well. Moving on to people. So if you've had any third-party people or third-party organizations join your meeting, which might be the case a lot of the time, they will actually be held in this meeting people section here. So what you will need to do is they'll be on hold here and you'll have to manually approve or deny them into your meeting. You'll be notified that someone is waiting here because you'll have a little notification on the people icon, just to say you've got people in your waiting room and don't need to be manually approved in. By default, anyone who's a member of your organization should be able to approve or deny users into the meeting. So moving on to the chat function, this is just used for anything that is getting sent during the meeting, you'll be able to refer back to these in the meeting history, which I will demonstrate in a bit. This will also be a way of showcasing any attachments that have been sent in this meeting as well. If I wanted to send a file, I would do that through the chat function here as well. So reactions are a way of interacting with a meeting without having to put your camera on or activate your microphone. This is a good way for if you are asking a question but you don't want anyone to respond at once on the microphone, you can just ask people to send a reaction instead. A good one to use is the raise hand feature. So what this does is it notifies that someone has raised their hand. So you can see if I've raised my hand here, and the meeting organizer will be able to see this and then respond to them. Once they've answered their question, they will be able to lower their hand as well. So next thing is meeting rooms. These are a good way to create breakout rooms, at which you can create either manually or automatically. You can set the number of rooms you want. By default, you're limited to 50 rooms. So if we split these up into 2 rooms, for example, so if these can only be set by the meeting organizer, third-party guests won't be able to create rooms without your permission. So you can assign participants to different rooms if you'd like to. You can create new rooms, refresh your rooms. What this will do is if you set it to automatic, you do recreate rooms, it will jiggle around and split everyone back up. So if we've got the settings section here. So assign presenters to manage. So this will basically give permission to people on who can manage the teams. Set a time limit. What this does is when the time limit gets reached, if you tell everyone to be in a breakout room for 10 minutes, once those 10 minutes are up, everyone will be moved back into the primary Teams meeting. What this will do, this setting here, by default, people will not be allowed to return to the main meeting unless the meeting organizer specifically does it. If you allow this option to be ticked, then everyone will be able to just join back the main meeting as and when they want to. Again, moving back to the reactions bit, when someone raises their hand when they are in a room, they will actually be able to see, the meeting organizer will be able to see this in the people section and will be able to hop into the appropriate room where that hand being raised. So you can rename the different rooms, you can join the different rooms as well, delete them, or close them entirely. And to delete all these existing rooms, once you do that, everyone will be moved back into the primary meeting. So moving on to device settings, we've got a couple of settings for here, mostly audio and video related. So one good one to note would be the noise suppression level you can change. By default, it is set to auto. Teams will basically manage this on its own for you. Or you can set these to off. What this will do is if you've got multiple people huddled around one device in a meeting together, it would be recommended to turn this off. What teams like to do is when one person is talking, it will pick up on their voice, and anything else around that it will try and mask or completely mute. So by turning this off, multiple people can be huddled around one device, and teams won't be trying to pick up their voices as noise. On the other hand, if you've got a really noisy background and it's just you on the meeting, you can set this to high, and then your background will be as muted as possible. Cool Health, this is mostly just diagnostics if you're having issues, but I wouldn't really worry about this too much. It's more diagnostics health stuff, which won't really be useful to you unless you're actually facing an issue. Meeting options. So meeting options are set again by the organizer, but if you're an organizer setting these meeting options, anything you set will carry over into future meetings as well. So bypassing lobby, this is what I mentioned about when people are joining, they will be set into a waiting room. This is how you can control this. So who can bypass lobby? If you set this to everyone, anyone with a Teams link to your meeting can just join into this meeting, no problem. people from my organization. So only people in your organization are able to come straight into your meeting and not have to be manually approved in. People in my organization and guests. So guests are different to everyone. So guests are manually created users in your Office 365 environment. Guests are not users that you have invited to the meeting. It's just worth noting that difference between the two. So by default, you've got external users and then you've got guests. Guests are sort of a middle ground between external people and licensed accounts in your Office 365. So if you do people in organization and guests, which is what mine's set to, if a third party wants to join my meeting, I would still have to manually approve them in the people section. So these two settings here, callers, these two relate to when people phone into a meeting. When you send out a Teams meeting invite, there's an option for users to call in via a phone number, and these settings basically control when those people do that. Who can present, you can limit who can present, you can limit that to specific people as well. Or you can set that to everyone. By default, it will be set to everyone, and this will allow guests as well to present their screens if they want to do. Allow micro attendees. This is good if you wanted to have a really controlled Teams meeting. You just wanted to showcase something without having people being able to allow to use their microphones and bypass being muted. And again, you can also tell people to all have their cameras off. This is quite good if you just wanted to have, again, a really restricted Teams meeting where you're just showcasing something and no one else is able to present. You can disable the chat as well. So there's a couple of options here. You can either disable the chat fully or have it in meeting only. So what this does is when you're chatting in Teams on a meeting, that chat history gets recorded, and then people can still chat after that meeting is over. So I will cover a bit of this more in a minute, but essentially this was a past meeting, for example. But even though it's a past meeting, it creates a sort of thread with everyone who was a member of that meeting, and then we could still send messages within this chat history. So if you wanted to restrict this, you can have this to meeting only, and then once the meeting is over, no one else can chat to each other. They'd have to create a separate group or chat thread after that. Allow reactions. This basically just disables reactions up here. It's worth noting that the raise hand reaction will still be there. It's a sort of a default reaction within Teams. It's sort of separate to the other funnier reactions. This one's more used for when people need to raise their hands and stuff. Meeting notes. This is a great way to take some meeting minutes, for example. What this will do is it'll take you back to a different tab within this meeting history. Again, this looks very much like the wiki section. So you can actually take some meeting minutes from here. It's a good way of just capturing everything. And then what that will do is people can refer back to these in their meeting history, and anyone who was invited to this to this team's meeting will be able to refer back to these meeting notes as well. Moving on to meeting info, really this is just if you wanted to copy the Teams link again, and then you can be able to send it to people on the fly without having to resend them a new invite from within Teams. You can just go ahead, copy and paste it into an email and send it to them. So gallery is just basically a way of controlling people when they are presenting their video. Their video on their screen. So gallery is a good way of sort of presenting people when they have their cameras on. You can limit these controls. These would be personal to the person. These gallery controls would be personal to the person changing these. So if I change this to large gallery, it might not reflect personally on everyone else's screen. So these are quite individual to whoever's joined that meeting. So full screen focus on content, or gallery on top. This is if you have multiple people in your team. What this essentially do is when you have a banner at the bottom and it says who's joined, you can even move that to the top. Again, focus on content is if someone is presenting their screen and you want to focus on that. So turning on live captions, this is a really good one if you are struggling to hear what the person is saying on the other end. You can turn on live captions. So what this will do is if you're struggling to hear what someone's saying, you can turn on live captions, and those captions actually get generated at their end. So what Teams does is it doesn't rely on the audio to get transmitted and then try and generate the captions, because it might still struggle to pick up on what that person's saying. Instead, it listens to what they're saying on their end, it generates the captions, and then sends them into the Teams meeting. So it's worth noting they're not super reliable yet. They are still sort of in testing, but they are a really good way that if you are struggling to hear someone, they will help you get over that sort of hurdle and you will be able to understand what they're saying. So starting a meeting recording. When you start a meeting recording, it will basically be notified up here at the top left so that everyone in the meeting will be able to see when that meeting is being recorded. It will also display a banner to tell people they're being recorded. It's worth noting when you start a recording, it will only record from the point you start recording. So it won't record, even though this meeting's been going on for 13 minutes, it won't record that 13 minutes that has already happened. It will only record from the point I click start. So anyone in your organization can start a recording. Guests won't be able to start a recording by default, and only one person can start a recording at once. So for example, if a meeting owner started a recording, anyone else won't be able to start or stop that recording. Show chat bubbles, don't show chat bubbles, and meeting notifications. These are individual settings for people. So if I click on these, it might not reflect on everyone else's Teams meeting as well. This is if the chat is going off. You can just sort of mute it. You'll still get the chat. If you click on that conversation, you just won't get those chat bubbles and get a mass amount of notifications. Mute notifications entirely. This is if you just want to mute anything else that's happening, so reactions, things being shared, that sort of stuff. And turn off incoming video is a really good one as well. So if you are in a low network area, turning off incoming video will actually really help you sort of prioritize the audio of that meeting instead, which can really help in the quality of video, of the meeting. So turning off incoming video is a great way to save up on data and also better hear people as well if you're struggling to. So moving on to screen sharing. So we've got a couple of different options for this. So what we can do is we can include computer sound. So firstly, if you want to share a video and you want people in that meeting to hear that video as well, you would need to include computer sound. So if I open up YouTube, people will then be able to hear what is on that YouTube video if this has been ticked. So moving on, we've got two different options here. We've got full screen and window. So typically, what I would recommend is if you want to share your screen with someone, I would recommend sharing the window only. So for example, if I wanted to share my Firefox window, users who I'm sharing my window with will only be able to see Firefox. If I minimize out of this, go into Teams, open up my emails, open up my help desk, people won't be able to see that because I'm only presenting my Firefox window. This is in contrast with sharing my entire screen, for example. When I share my entire screen, anything I then open, people will be able to see. This also includes notifications that pop up on your computer as well. So my recommendation will always be to share a particular window or share a particular file as opposed to sharing your particular screen, because when you share your screen you might get into that situation where you're oversharing with people or something might come up that you don't want other people in the meeting to see. So it's just something to be wary of. So next we've got whiteboard. This is what an interactive drawing area. for everyone in the meeting. So once this gets set up, people will be able to put notes, reaction shapes, images, and documents and text on the screen. And then people will sort of be able to draw on from that, and this will all be happening in the meeting. You'll be able to refer this back later. You can also then export these, and then you can also upload backgrounds as well to make it a bit more personalized. Again, you can export these after, and then anyone in the meeting will be able to join this. So next thing to do is you've got PowerPoint Live, which is a really good feature on here. It basically allows you to upload a PowerPoint presentation into Teams itself, and you can present to users from there. So instead of having to open up Teams and then sharing your screen, going to PowerPoint and all that sort of stuff, you can share your PowerPoint presentation directly into Teams without having to switch through different apps and manage all that type of stuff. Cool. You've got two different options, leave or end meeting. When you leave, all the guests in the meeting will still be able to talk to each other. That meeting will still be active. If you want to end meeting, this will pull everyone out of the meeting and end it for everyone entirely. So once that has been processed, you'll be left with a Teams meeting history. So what this will do is it will act as sort of like an audit log of everything that's happened within the Teams, any chats that have been sent, any files that have been sent, and any other actions such as starting recording, stopping recording. All of this will be saved within here, which people can then refer back to. The meeting owner, and only the meeting owner, will be able to produce an attendance report. These won't be available to everyone in the organization, so the meeting owner will need to send these out if need be. And this will just be an Excel file which they can generate and see who joined, how long they spent time for, what time they joined, what time they left, all that type of stuff. So as you can see, the recording is currently saving, so it takes a little bit of time to process. Typically, I find that if a meeting's about an hour long, it might take you about 15-20 minutes to generate that file. So, and then what that does is it actually saves it within your OneDrive. So if I click on Open here, it might ask me to sign in. So essentially what this will do, it will just take you to your OneDrive area. If you wanted to share this meeting file with other people in your organization, you can do get link or copy this, or you can go into your OneDrive, move it somewhere else, and then share it on from there. But it's worth noting that whoever started the recording, it's going to save to their personal OneDrive. So it's just worth noting that. Cool. So next, moving on, is the integration with third-party apps, which we mentioned. So again, you could have these built into different teams and different channels. Alternatively, you could have these built into your personal team environment and not accessible to anyone else. So what I mean by that is if I wanted to have my OneNotes accessible from my teams, I can add this. And this will be accessible from my Teams app. So instead of having to open up OneNote as a separate application on my desktop, I can integrate OneNote into my Teams environment. This will be personal to me because I have not linked it to any team or channel. It's just for me on the side here. And then I can access all my OneNotes from here as well. So it's quite a good feature if you want to start building up your pool of apps you have access to. You can add a lot more. There are a lot more third-party apps as well, which you can integrate. My recommendation would be to obviously try and stick with Microsoft ones where possible, but you do have a range of third-party apps as well, which you can integrate into your team and use from there. The idea being that Teams will start to become your one-stop shop, a sort of hub for all of your working space, so that if you just want to get on and work, the idea is that your files will be in SharePoint, all your files will be in OneDrive, and that will all be accessible through Teams, and you've just got one area to work in. You won't have to worry about anything else. So if I go into files, for example, I'll have access to my OneDrive files. So like we saw here, it creates a folder for my recordings, all of my meetings, and here we go. As we can see, that recording has just been generated and popped into my OneDrive. If I had regular files in here as well, I'd be able to open these up within Teams. It would open up an instance of Word within my Teams, and then I wouldn't have to actually open up a separate Word application or separate Excel application or PowerPoint. I could just work from everything within Teams itself. Microsoft Teams, you'll be able to see all your downloads, all your attachments that have been sent in previous Teams. Anything you have access to will be available here as well. And then, like I said, you can build up these pools of applications and then really build this to a point where you don't have to use many applications at all. Teams will be able to provide you with a central area for you to control all your work. So the next thing to note is the call section within Teams. So the call section is if you've got access to the Teams mobile phone subscription. So this is a separate subscription to your Teams, your regular Teams one. This will be set up with a phone number, and you can add contacts and make actual phone calls within Teams. But like I said, you would need a separate subscription in order for this to work. So going back to the presentation. So going back to our presentation. So what we learnt from this presentation today. So we've learned that the desktop version and the web version are very similar up until the point we start joining a meeting. And at that point, the desktop version has a lot more features and capabilities than the web version. We've learned that the difference between teams and channels is that teams are a way of grouping different channels together, and channels are a way of sending messages, sending files, and integrating apps into that channel as well, so people can work collaboratively within the Teams environment. There's a couple of different options of creating teams, as we've learned. We can create one from scratch, create one from templates, and we can even set different privacy options within Teams to make them either public or private. We've also learned that within Teams, the settings, so different ways of controlling what members can do, and also different ways of integrating the apps and deleting the apps, and also setting different mention tags as well, which might be worth something having a look into and playing with. Next, we've learned what the Teams meeting interface is and how to interact with that. We learned about how to start recordings, the limitations on what guests can and can't do within Teams, and best ways of presenting your screen and presenting content within Teams. Next, we've seen how to access that Teams meeting history in the chat section. You'll be able to go back to your Teams meetings, go back to your notes you've taken, any chats you've sent, files that were sent, etc. Lastly, we've learned about integrating third-party apps and how those can actually boost productivity within Teams. Essentially, what these will do is they will stop users from having to go to multiple apps. Everything will be within Teams. Users can just load up Teams on their computer when they start the day and should just be able to get on and work straight from within there and spend most of their day within Teams as opposed to having to switch between various different apps. The last thing to note, which I can't showcase on this one today, is Teams also has a whole load of back-end policies that we can set up as well. So these are admin policies which get set up by us, and these also control more organization-wide settings, such as not being able to allow users to delete messages, edit messages, restrict the type of content that's been sent, and run audit reports as well. These will be global throughout your Office 365 environment. So instead of having to manually set each team to have a specific policy, we can roll that out from a central point instead, making it easier to control the team's environment and not having to make you do all the settings and configuration every time you create a team. So next thing to note is a couple of events coming up. So we've got the next one is in end of June, mastering Microsoft OneDrive and SharePoint. This basically elaborates on sort of what we've talked on today about integrating OneDrive and SharePoint into Teams, but it will also be showcasing how they interact on their own as a standalone product from Teams. So we'll be dipping into Teams a bit into that one, but mostly focusing on how they work as a standalone product and how they can sort of transition away from traditional server-based file storage solutions.